Yes, that.
Yeah.
All right. Good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. It's nice to meet y'all. My name's Nikaylee Davis. I am the Assistant Clerkship Director of Emergency Medicine at Emory, and I'm here with a lovely group of people. Do y'all want to introduce yourselves?
I'm ADIEM. I'm from Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas.
Hi everybody, I'm Katrina Gibson. I'm Emory faculty at Grady in Emory, and as of yesterday, I'm an immediate past president of the ADIEM. Thank you for joining us.
You have a
LA Alvarez, Director of Wellbeing at Stanford.
Edgar Gomez, Director of Health Equity and Action at Baylor College of Medicine.
Okay, awesome. So today, this session is called Navigating the Storm, Communication in Times of Crisis. I guess this clicker does not work, so we'll just do the old-fashioned way. There we go. Oh, do you know how to fix it?
I don't know.
I don't know why.
I'll pretend like I'm clicking something.
Okay. So we don't have any disclosures. One thing that I do want to point out is that everything that's said here is the opinion of the individual. We are not representing our institutions. So the objectives for today, so by the end of this session, we're hoping that we will be able to explain the critical components of crisis communication, apply a crisis communication framework to real life cases, which we'll be going through today. And then we hope that you'll be able to leave with effective strategies as leaders to help communicate in times of crisis in your own institutions. So we also wanted to start with a community agreement statement because we're discussing some things that might be controversial or triggering. We just wanted to go ahead and have a nice community agreement statement. So we want everyone to remember that this is a safe and brave space. We encourage open dialogue, and we ask that you show care and respect for facilitators and for one another. We want to recognize the emotional weight of some of the specific scenarios that we'll be discussing or current events that can carry for some. Our examples are drawn primarily from generalized or fictional cases. We listen with compassion, share your views, and do not criticize, but please be respectful of all participant opinions. So during this session, we are hoping to discuss the importance of effective and inclusive crisis communication. So crises can be very personal. They can also be local. They can be regional. They can be global. Some things that come to mind are there can be, public health outbreaks, acts of terrorism, new legislation that changes how we practice or how we have to practice medicine. And these things can be very troublesome. So back in April of 2024, the ADIEM Education Committee had a webinar, and the webinar was focused on best practices for inclusive messaging. Unfortunately, there is not too much literature on how to communicate during times of crisis, so we had a panel of experts, of national leaders, these panels right here. And they were able to kind of discuss core principles for how to communicate during times of crises. Some of those core principles that I want you to think about are centering the people that are most affected, pausing before acting, and then finally to really advocate for the people who are most affected. Before we move forward and go through the cases, we just wanted to take a group poll. And it's a quick 5 questions. So if you could just bring up the poll, and this is just so we can get an idea of who has had to, communicate in times of crises. What are your thoughts on it? And then after that, so I'll give everyone about a minute to bring up the poll. And then after you have a chance to go through the poll, we're going to split into 3 groups, and we're going to each talk about a different case. And then we'll kind of come back together as a group and discuss about what we've learned, how we can use a framework going forward to communicate in times of crises. So I will give everyone about a minute to go through this group poll. Everyone good? Perfect. Okay, so now we're gonna break out and do some cases and really have good discussion about how to communicate during specific crises. If you use this QR code, it will take you to 3 different cases, and we are gonna split the room up into 3 groups. So, trying to see how many people we have in here. Maybe we can do group 1 over here. Group 2 is kind of this back section, and group 3 is right here. So group 1 will do case 1, group 2 will do case 2, and group 3 will do case 3. So we'll spend about 15 to 20 minutes discussing the cases with your facilitators, and then we will come back together and discuss. It's in the. They can do that.
Oh, yeah, just circle up.
I know. Okay.
We're able to access the.
Okay. I'll come sit in this room. Just guys. Or do you want to sit in this room? Okay, I can. Oh.
I'm just like flying by the beauty of their shoes, right?
Or do you want to check out?
My OET and my boarding pass are in my phone, so I wouldn't be able to make it very far.
Being inclusive with the language tool. And candidates to communities.
All right, so.
Can we read the case
Okay.
first? I don't know
I
that.
think we're gonna jump right in. The case that I'm gonna be facilitating today is actually case number 3. Before we get started, this is a case that I started being interested in facilitating with interpersonal relations of the work that I do. I want to make sure that everybody who is involved here, this is a lot of this is related to diversity and including work and so well you are a champion of this.
So I'm sure that
Another committee leadership role is whatnot. There's a lot of anxiety and tension currently
whether it's on
around this type of work. So
during
I
Congress.
appreciate you
So
joining us and taking the time to kind of have this discussion. I'll go ahead and read the case. We'll jump right into the questions. I'm here to kind of facilitate various ideas, your thoughts,
So this answer
put some
is
things
through my
together.
my communities, my trainees, coming after a disaster and patients coming in.
And whatnot.
So vaccine exposure.
Case number 3 is
I was speaking
your
to like
academic emergency department has
the
been
places
to foster
media or like conversations
Entire
with patients or the communities.
program.
I like what you're bringing to
Care
the like
initiative.
that's it kind of will just at least different voices and different methods depending who we're speaking with. Why don't we take the topic out and we're just talking to our resident trainees. Like how would you address that? Because they probably have a lot of questions
These
and
changes have caused an institutional review.
giving them the right information without also kind of be overwhelming them with those
Concerns about faculty, trainees, and staff.
One of the
I
things.
feel like my
So as I was going through kind of,
I would be
I decided I wanted to change
Originally
one of the
created
questions.
missions.
First question is more about. I actually thought that question
That was
two
shit what
was
they
a little
were
bit more appropriate to
Yeah.
discuss at the beginning.
By the wrong.
Was
So like
really about
So-
kind of communication and
toxicology or something.
So
Having
Like,
it sounds
question number 2,
Here's our knowledge, let's get our
before
knowledge.
you get into the conversation,
strategy.
setting.
Yeah, I can also imagine that there's
How we're
like
gonna interact.
he used in the hospital disaster and won't necessarily like disaster.
Give space for
Especially where
I think you're going outside just the workforce.
people kind of give you a quick download of like, here's what you need to know, here's like the things that you might be exposed to.
So
Like
now it's
that
something
do initiatives.
even before we get into these
Some of these
situations,
probably gonna
create an atmosphere of collaborativeness and connection. Because I think ultimately when you're doing social discussions
Yeah,
and it's signing love, which I probably wouldn't say to my colleagues. But I'm happy.
What is reason for
Um,
this?
So.
Helps you. Imagine the folks who makes me one day selling alcohol.
So really,
Like, and you realize when you're taking care of these, like this disaster, it's not just that, it's what the communities are experiencing. Like some of them are like your residents, some of your fellow
so we're now.
or nurses, so like, then for the I'm in the conversation, check in with people, they have the right resources, while also having that expectation that first decision result, show up to work, and take care of other things. That's another level of nuance.
This is really.
Piece out of this.
But the changes that are being made are
How we want
always
to
adapt
treat
to
each other, how we
continue
want to
doing
treat
work rather than to like
how we want to interact.
efforts, I guess. And then also space for people to like voice their
Yeah,
concerns about any
Just
changes that are
with the-
happening.
You know, like
I think that was probably
I mean,
helpful
this
for a
is
lot of
cultural
us
work
to
that we've
make
been
sure
sharing
that
earlier,
like
so we can
institutions
groups of ouch and
like practices are not necessarily changing, but a lot of like the language around what we're doing has to change. So I think that we're having
Sure, I
a space where bring questions is helpful. I guess that's it. Are they addressing useful
we've
strategy?
set up a good groundwork.
Reassure people
Sure.
level that the word
Well,
is
we
not
mean
there, but like the way we do it,
embrace
like either being on the same page or trying to fill.
I think that kind of, I think you're some of it.
But it's not just,
Wasn't something
Really diversity.
Definitely.
I want to hear colleagues.
knowledge,
Addressing.
that's right, so that's usually the common thing, hospital and stuff.
Well, I know that.
Definitely.
But let curiosity.
Yeah, it's a conversation.
You know,
I think from a general sense,
Yeah.
something that I kind of struggle with and observe is kind of like that balance between like disclosing as much information as known about them versus what you need to know. About them. It does
Some of us
kind
know
of
stories
what
and.
crisis or situation we're facing. I think for probably the case in the STEM, oversharing probably goes a lot better. I mean, we're in a state that's very similar to the way this is described, right? And so things were coming off a little bit piecemeal until we really had to sit down with like
Medicine,
the entire department, et cetera, to say, hey, this is what we're looking at. These are all considerations. The first one that did go a long way.
Encounter that we would have.
The flip side,
That's
versus
how I
that,
thought, right, how do you maintain
working
that,
with very
like,
limited information,
clinical
even in
care
this past
responsibility,
year,
but
like,
also maintaining that, like, you have to create a supportive
So,
environment. and
trying to fit
also
that into
support
that balance of
environment for
do we
people
know
to
what you
actually
don't know,
survive this thing.
how much of that should we share as a group, et cetera, is I think a hard balance in those.
From the students.
I agree. I like to like call situation or
Just like.
Like, having that
we know
I would
what
say
we know, but as things are things are like, the absence of full disclosure, like, you know, just putting out there, like, the absence of full disclosure is not much.
Situation right now, are you okay?
This is
Able to do what you need to do.
So bringing that.
Right?
Well,
You're also affected by.
Sure.
So that people don't.
So I feel like even that
Over
small
family.
thing.
We're not,
Mindset.
you know, in some ways,
I think balance that. Again, we have a.
what it should be.
Having busy staff. and
It's
like,
in everyone's
Yeah, center of the
to
just so
misinform.
to
Go back.
go on shift the next couple of days or once the
I mean, that reminds me a little bit about
You just
it's my kind of my information on the scale. You know, things aren't really that helpful. And then trying to go back later and explain to people. Actually, our it would have been all this that preface initially to say, we don't know all of the information yet, so this may or not be kind of what you were talking about with bringing things to the plan. It's like actually like some of the academy
In a session.
the fact that work is still continuing
Yeah.
or to start to dissolve the committee and continue the academy so that we are continuing to do that work and we're just trying to think about it slightly differently so it looks like you know closing the committee that we're maybe shying away from some of those efforts but we're really not and here's why and here's how we can talk about it.
So it's been mad to have much effectively, right?
That's right.
So
Disclosure, yeah.
I made the decision as the vice
Well,
chair.
then, when it's like, there's no like quick input, so a lot, it's one of the things that, and I see it in my system.
Well, I guess the only thing I was
Not the
trying to
time is that.
Why?
I think when you have something like this, there has to be like
That space.
this person
And to be like, okay, this is happening. We have to also time to get to be like,
Okay, here's what
acknowledge
the
this
law
is happening
states.
and what's happening.
There's a lot of things that people think like, oh, everything DEI has to go away.
What is it you're responsible for the community?
So taking what it doesn't affect.
They're that
so
they make
still
sure they're able to still do what they need to do, like, but I think that kind of pause of like, okay, there is this crisis in process or in progress. And we just gonna react to it, we're so good at doing emergency medicine, are we actually gonna take a beat and like think about a more intentional response on a variety of levels, or what are you kind of levels we have to think about? Because I'm not sure that when I read the case that I immediately even right into this.
So one of the things that I think is actionable is that there's
That's a very
an
good point.
expected
Especially because
We're very
like,
young.
what are the laws,
because we don't care, like we care so much.
So it's like a very
That's where we're good at it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think there's that like short
And I
term,
think there's
so we can do, but without somebody kind of reflecting back, like in the long term, how is this actually impacting the
And they
culture
started
now?
doing that.
Right.
Because also how we respond to that
Really
particular
early on.
moment, how we communicate,
And
how we check in with people. They're gonna remember that, right? Because the moment, like I'm coming from a place where also when the vaccine was rolled out, like the ED did not dare share the vaccines, and we just saw that in the news, you were in the world news where my residents were because they were not able, they couldn't have the residents just for sure. So like we were in the news that like Stanford forgot about their ladies, and then we saw 2 years later we were in the like their union like things like that, like that one message. And this also like having people on the table to have conversations like, hey, what is our feedback? So like again, well, I give you the thing, like, what can we do for our department, for our university, for our hospital to help this? And so without people from like emergency medicine, for instance, and that's what happened. It's like literally they had experts collating the names of people that needed to have access to the vaccine immediately, like the front lines, but they like nobody. There was no positions in the list. And so the database, he used like database from like, I mean, it's not a decade ago, and so like they're all gone. And so like, it's not that they were graduated, they were like, wow, we're like the people who were like actually working on that. So that's like, so like these are important things to forget sometimes without having that pause of like, where are we, what do we need right now, is everybody okay? And also like making sure that we understand that even if it's like a short term thing, right? Like maybe it's like not like a big Los Angeles fire, but like maybe something like that is a different response, and also the communication is different, right? And
versus, hey, now we know.
I think there's gotta be a check-in as well, like it's not the wellness space coming in, like you can't have the same person giving the news all the time. There's also a lot of so obviously responsibilities, people can also go home, rest, take care of their family. I think that is the intentionality that's in it.
Well, a different message and what different people do.
For sure.
Really want the message and come
That's right. Yes.
because not everybody can hear that message.
I think for sure,
Quotes, yeah.
regardless of all.
Maybe some QI is like over seeing what's not gonna especially like I mean like kind of on a social fabric level. I think
So, next question.
No, well, I'm at Maine in Midtown, so we don't even, we definitely don't.
Well, it's a great opportunity as well to learn the sign up process. Like for us, they're really taking ownership now, like kind of trouble, at least like beginning to like check in with people. I think that's a good way, like cause yeah.
To this question and to one different shifts.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's
Allows for
practice.
space. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Allows for space to acknowledge.
For example, work might involve
Frustrations, disappointment,
just think what can we
there's
say?
definitely a lot of anger. Like,
What exactly does this
hold on,
for
must
what
be
we're doing? And for
people are just constantly gonna like, yes, I'm just here to do work and nobody cares. And that is
and our limitations before we begin to reference.
Because we're talking about the laws, and then like kind of just assess that situation. It's very important.
And we had all these like materials that we would
Paul had like a sense for like when is like a pause too long or was too short, because sometimes I wonder if it was too long and people
okay, like
I think we're still there, or they're just trying to like wait for this to.
and then they did like retrace some of our wording. So our like what official documents
But there's like not.
the
So
wording.
for the longer
You
term,
mean
why
to start with pause or the time range?
The time already was like before you really get a response,
We
like how
relied
long
heavily on
before
Right,
respond to whatever crisis might be.
right.
And the guidance is.
what have you done? Yeah.
Yeah.
So for us, for COVID, since it was a longer one, I'd say probably the first 2 months, every 4 p.m. The program leader shared with ADs, with the residency presidents, we met every day. Because it just allows us with these pin-ups to also show up so that we know, just like, what's new, like, it's like every day there's like a new thing that was coming up, so that we would also like voice things like, did you know that the other hospital didn't have gloves? So they were like, we can't have a residential, so we were giving them like, so like, just being aware of which understands, because even though it's not a lot, but being heard, some of it is very important, and also having a cadence that like, you don't have to show up, so like, we did like, then we did like every Friday, was like the hour, via Zoom, just to create that sense of community, because this can be so isolating for people.
We switched it up a bit.
Yeah?
Like not really, but like we did, because we like shared all this information.
Sure.
Can't really argue those things, right? So, but we
I
still.
was gonna say, you probably see those residents, like, they would stay for like 3 hours afterwards, like, she's not go home, and then I met somebody actually told me, I was like, you realize the only time I get to hang out with people, like, and then I was like, it's like heartbreaking, and I'm saying that's very real, right? It's like, you're right, like, when you're resident, your family's not harder, like, it's a serious time to find community, and I think making sure that, like, we honor that is also.
I know that a lot of us have worked with them.
Well, I guess the inspiration of the postponement depends on what's happening, like again, if it's a spill, let's say in this case, and we're gonna be having people come in. The temperature toxins, we probably do need to have enough time to kind of, how are we gonna actually medically treat this?
Especially if
How
you're
many people are gonna be
for shift
expected, where are we gonna
the
put
cognitive
them?
load of
What's the
like,
hospital
right,
going to like,
Well,
what's out?
based things
Disorder.
more of a,
and,
How are we
you know, at
gonna
the end of the day, it's
approach
just
this,
like, what I've been doing is cultural.
We're gonna come
Right
in,
now,
what do we want?
I'd love to be most direct on which
Or
would
the elements that they're focused,
and
so the
why
direction
the
was
incident,
you know, stuff I
on what the situation is, but.
in St. Louis, the epicenter of the civil explosion.
Cause you probably could get
most
maybe,
effective the vaccine rates.
but it's kind of shifted.
Integral to our institutions. But if I can't get
Yeah, line with.
and I can still talk to
they were driving,
and
It's
they more thought to you know, in my institution, which is historic. Just wow, that's all I said.
Yeah.
And honestly, what we did was just.
It's not the same.
It's not the same. It's
Structural racism, systemic
You know,
racism.
it's still, yes.
It's blood through.
It's what's built.
Topic, it was like,
So whether I can be super direct or not, at the end of the day, I'm so
Never
glad
ideal.
more thoughtful.
Sure.
And I think you just
But it's also probably just for that hospital and doesn't
art
apply
and
to.
training from the WFC and restorative justice has a lot of the same principles.
So that's pretty
But it
straightforward.
doesn't have a lot. And so,
Changing the
point
name, yeah.
is
That's a very
you
kind
have
of like
conversations
disguising things that we also.
with the guardrails. But if you're, because what happens is
One
you
last
don't
thing,
get when you're not guiding them, they're half
The primary things that.
people
And what I'm hearing as well is like.
develop more, hear more, feel more,
Planning for like
things that we're all
spill, but having like a big thing. Here's what we're gonna do.
Our
Just
diversity
check like
statement.
who's on board with like who's gonna be checking in with people, who's gonna be like
And then the
gonna
other
talk to the
thing
media.
was
Like how do we get the mandatory? How to make sure the information that we have is accurate, and so that is very very helpful. And again, like
one option
it
is
keeps
to
it
say
more.
replace.
You plan a training as opposed to customers and what else are we gonna do?
You know, clinical quality.
How do you ensure that transparency
Different, I mean,
with the conversation? Because I can imagine like learners will have questions, so if you reduce errors,
you know.
your colleagues will have questions, your medical director may have questions, but you just have.
We want to talk about things
So I
like
think it's difficult. I also think there's sometimes things that you sort of know, but that you don't think everybody's rolled until you get. So there's like this situation of how to really
Yeah, so a lot of
Yeah, not to create panic.
Right.
You know, like imagine like spill over like.
All right, so last question.
It's not.
How do we measure and communicate the advice of our team? Well, I like to say that's changing plans.
Yes, that's it, yeah.
Information is changing. So we need to have a way to get that.
Yes.
So it's probably a difficult question. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
before we started our relationship, we had lost 70%.
Yeah.
I remember you know, so.
Yeah.
It's the ownership fall.
Yeah. There's little things.
For the first couple of years.
I don't know if people actually read it, so I don't like assigning somebody to read it over if they don't do it, so you can just have to create one in the moment, but I do think there's something about it, just checking in, making sure there's hey, we don't hurt, so being, I think, like, here's what I know, here's what we need to know right now. How are you doing? So the things that like wellness under leadership is like focusing on just making sure that like, people are aware that we're trying our best, we're giving them information to be shared, we're not able to give all the information, but allowing them
And I think one of the things that is like so obstacle is there's a lot that like they, you know, nobody has me by now.
I got the changing.
Really nobody is very taken. It was really just spreading it, like nobody really, just but people would sound like you just when they would speak publicly, so they sounded very definitive about masks, about washing our groceries, about like all kinds of shit. So right, yeah, and so I write climate has been. I just wish it to just for a long time. You're taking the best guesses. We're going to be wrong, but this is our best guess. We've been so it sounds like we need to.
And how do you navigate that, because there's also a lot of constructs that's like just factory
Especially better to say, true, typically.
yeah, I would ask guys.
Their social terms, so really commercial.
Google
And then just like provide data basically.
continue that trust. I think you're right, you know, something which is just like.
Logical distance from
Yeah.
that.
But I think having just that, I don't know what you're saying is just kind of this being vulnerable. It's like I don't have insurance, right? Like our chair has shared this many times. Like when like many things happen in our department, it's like, they haven't like I didn't study. There's no textbook. It's like you know, right? And so but then everybody feeling like she always has the answer.
Right.
It's something that I'm like.
Because then when she's wrong, then everybody like trusting her, but like
I'm dealing
reading
with
magazine, like, let's figure this out. Or while also at the end of the day, she's like that. Yeah.
Isn't it interesting? Like how long is
Put aside your emotions to intellectual.
you know, like
Almost, you know,
like before
You know, C-suite people, things like that.
We're also like, again, like we're smart people, focus on emergency medicine, we're trying to like solve the problem, we're fixers, and so like we hypothesize a lot of things, we think of the worst things possible, so like amongst ourselves, we're actually 23 minutes on this, and we just.
Yeah, so I think.
Let's maybe have been saying, like, this is the right one, like I really love that conversation.
Yeah.
Just open the like the communication.
Since we're talking about
I just wanted the knowledge related to the med, I'm having a lot of med
Yeah.
like I don't really know if I reinforcing parts and
I sent you the link.
The ones
already.
Not talking.
Yeah.
We know you, but you I might.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, and they have like, they have
But
somebody.
I think so.
Inspiring.
no, they're gonna share you.
Yeah.
I think this is.
We're like,
These are really.
Okay, everyone, I know this conversation is going really good. This is a topic that is near there to a lot of us. But we're gonna just take a minute to report out and share and discuss from individual groups. And obviously we can chime in from other groups, but we wanna give enough time to share because the discussion has been really critical. So, we'll start, does any group feel particularly strong in starting first? Any takers? Okay, so I'm just gonna pick them. Does anyone want to start first? We didn't hear you at first, okay.
Maybe a quick summary of like.
Oh, okay, no, so we're gonna get back into the group and report out. I said the conversation was going good, so I'm excited to hear what we discussed in our group. So the facilitators are gonna give us the general point.
So we're talking about case 3 first?
So we're starting with case 3, yeah.
All right, so I went through case 3 and I'll read it briefly just so everyone can know where we're at. The cases that were in academic emergency department, long committed to fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion, who are high impact emotional, educational programming, and patient care initiatives. There have been recent national and state level legal shifts that created uncertainty around the legality and implementation of DEI-related efforts in academic institutions. So these changes have prompted institutional review and redefinition of DEI policies, raising concern on faculty, communities, and staff. So I skipped to the second question first. I actually went through to question number 2 just because I felt that kind of like the acknowledgement.
I think it's hard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see if this is testing. Can you hear that? Testing. No? That's not on. Okay.
That's fine. I'll just speak up. This is a small room.
Yeah, just speak.
Right. So
Testing,
I went through,
testing.
Question number 2 first, which is about communication strategy.
Testing.
Just because I felt like it was very important to kind of just
Testing.
acknowledge that there is something happening, right? So going through the what, why, and
just speak
next. So when we were discussing in our group, we felt it was important to create space for discussion, either through town halls, an opportunity for people to ask questions, because there's a lot of questions going on around the DEI work currently, and then opportunity to basically voice their concerns. So this is all about, providing this, psychological safety for individuals, letting them understand that that there is some empathy around this work. Obviously, we know what's going on, but also an opportunity for us to kind of provide disclosure and relay information, factual, ideally, because we want to give facts, and then having regular communication kind of throughout the entire process, because we know that there's, this kind of landscape is like ever evolving when it comes around to DEI work. So, one kind of like take home, I kind of quote that a couple of things that I had thought about putting together were, telling people, here's what the new law requires, here's what it doesn't affect, and here is how our mission to advance health equity continues. All right. So same goals, new playbook. So then we went to question 1, which we did second. How do we adapt our DEI initiatives to comply with new regulations while maintaining our commitment to inclusion? So one of the things was obtaining, obviously, more information, because it's just coming from everywhere. So obviously, again, wanting to get facts, making sure we have good sources of information, and what this information actually means. So bringing in experts. I feel like everybody who's involved in this DEI work at their institution has at some point talked to legal counsel about what you can and what we can't do at the moment. So there is going to come a time where we're going to need to reword and relabel things. So this is kind of about, folding, bias mitigation content into, things like patient safety programs, right? And kind of tying those things in together, as opposed to calling it an anti-bias workshop, right? Another idea is like scholarships. Many of us provide scholarships. Previously, they were scholarships for URIM students. So maybe it's shifting to a need-based plus a mission fit. So if, we have students who have a commitment to care of underserved populations and whatnot, that's kind of something that we may need to shift a little bit. And again, it's all about letting data kind of like, drive this. So that kind of ties in with, the last question, which is how do we measure and communicate this impact. And I think that we need to look at outcome-oriented metrics, right? So things like retention rates, patient care, quality, and looking at social determinants of health in your metrics, and also pairing your metrics with key performance indicators. And one example that we laid out was talking about, the impact that our work within health equity does, but using something like, so-and-so, by using our new language access protocol, we cut left without being seen rates in Spanish-speaking patients by, this percentage. So a lot of the, giving these kind of stories, they humanize the data and they, kind of skirt around demographic quotas, but they're still important to people in the C-suite. So that's about it. Anybody have any questions about that? We'll move on to the next.
Dr. Gibson, do you want to go next? All right, we're just working backwards. Case 2 now.
Right, so our case was something that I'm sure everyone can relate to. It's a U.S. presidential election is approaching, and we are having polarized and sometimes offensive, problematic discussions within our department, right? And I know that we all come from various places throughout the United States where some of those discussions might be a little bit more charged than others. And even within our small group, we represented various regions and have had very different experiences, whether it's maybe Fox News was playing in the lounge and that is sparking uncomfortable conversations to maybe someone just referred to your trauma patient as a gangbanger, and we're having to deal with all of the implications of that and how it may impact patient care and how it may change and impact the environment for your learners. So this is a scenario that we are all living with and dealing with in various capacities. So one of the things that we wanted to discuss was how can we foster respectful dialogue about DEI issues across political divides? And one of the things that we really emphasized within our talk was just to lean into empathy. Now, I know that a lot of terminology in this context is, controversial, and regardless of, and maybe empathy isn't popular depending upon where you fall on the spectrum, but at least it's a word that we can use. It's something that we all can kind of to rally around, as well as, establishing community rules, similarly to what we did earlier today. These safe and brave spaces. What types of things are we going to talk about? How are we going to lean into our mission, whether it's at the university level or the departmental level? Because let's be honest, and this came up in discussion as well, sometimes they are not one and the same. There can be instances in which your university's leadership is telling you to say nothing or to maybe convey a message of neutrality, which we think is not necessarily consistent with taking care of our patients and our learners, and let's be honest, each other. A lot of us here are leaders within the DEI space, whether it's within this organization or even within your institution, and there is a tax and a burden that comes with doing that work as well. So we talked about, establishing the stakeholders from all the way from maybe patient representatives to our residents, our students, and other attendees within the department to make sure that all of our needs are met. What type of language should happen with it when these types of things arise, and also the spaces in which a conversation should take place. Of course, maybe a heated argument at the patient's bedside is not the place to have that conversation. Let's be honest, that's a lot of times that these comments take place. A lot of us refer to the AAMC's training in restorative practices, formerly known as restorative justice practices, because let's be honest, patient care should take precedence, but in order to deliver gold standard care, we need to feel safe with our colleagues, with our nursing staff, with our techs in order to do so. If your nurse just referred to a patient as a gangbanger, maybe they're also labeling them as opioid seeking, and we all know that there are inequities in who receives opioids or pain management depending upon what you look like and or how your environment perceives you. And how do we respond to these external pressures while staying true to our organizational values? Of course, we mentioned relying on some of the resources that your university and or department has mentioned. Dr. Heron has legal on speed dial. And let's be honest, if you want to we want to make sure that you all are able to join us at SAM next year in the same capacity. So I don't want you we'll get a GoFundMe together maybe if we can. But in all seriousness, these are troubling times. Words that we thought seemed relatively benign are now controversial, and this can strike a lot of discord and confusion. And some of us might make the argument that that's the point of all this. We're confused, we're scared, we're overwhelmed. So we're often put in places where we want to possibly react as opposed to respond. So the work that we are doing is controversial. Don't always feel as leaders in DEI or community belonging, whatever your title may be now, that you are the sole, person to respond. Make sure that you are relying on your resources or maybe even your departmental leadership share the burden. And make sure that you're not put in places where you're supposed to be accepting all of the blame and fallout from orders or legislation that you don't agree with or is maybe not consistent with your department's mission or even your personal values and or mission. And also remember, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Make sure that I know we're angry and we're frustrated, but it's difficult to lead a movement coming from those spaces. So make sure that you also are giving space for peace and your own joy, whatever that may look like. So those are our case two.
All right. And now, case one, Dr. Alvarez.
All right. So we strategized to make sure that case one was going to be the very beginning. This is a lot easier, and then we're ending to case three. So it's even harder to start with case, or it's even harder, I think, to end with case one because the topic that we tackled is an environmental hazard. So there's a spill, chemical spill that's not affecting your environment, your neighborhood, your patient population. And when we were talking about it in our group, we centered it from how do we first check in with each other? How do we make sure that we're going to be okay to take care of the rest of our patient population? And then once we're able to do that, we can then address all the other stuff that's happening. Again, this is in the context of we're emergency physicians. We're ready for this kind of stuff. We're prepared for a lot of the emergencies. And often that's actually the downfall of us, right? We're so reactive to so many things that we forget to pause, to just check in, what do we need right now? Is everybody okay? And then how do we continue doing this? A spill, I think, is a one-time thing, and maybe you're gonna see, 1,000 patients over the course of a week. But what happens if it's a fire, in LA? Or what happens when there's COVID that everybody is now going to go through, and then having to figure out how to communicate with each of our team members is gonna be very challenging. And so we shared a couple of experiences of how are we going to do this? And so I love the conversation about maybe we just need to pause first. Where are we? What are the right informations? And also being able to acknowledge that I don't have all the answers right now. There's probably somebody in the hospital who knows how to deal with this right now, right? So some hospitals have annual disaster planning. And if you don't have that, it's probably a good time to check in in your program, what happens when this thing happens? Right? Because we never predicted large fires that we are experiencing now. The hurricanes are becoming more frequent, and it impacts not just our patients, but also what happens when it actually we need to open the emergency department 24/7. But what if our staff members, our residents, our faculty, your home is as part of that disaster? How do you then show up as a leader and also make space for everybody else? So I think from a wellness-centered leadership, it's always important to look at the people first. What do we need? How are we doing? How can we take care of ourselves so that, again, you can't pour in an empty cup, right? How do we fill our cup in those moments? So one of the things that we also discuss is, so for COVID, for instance, we had every 4 p.m., PD leadership, the chief residents would meet with ClinOps and everybody else would drop in to just have a quick huddle. Here's what's happening. Here's what we know. Here's the evolving needs that's coming up, so that people have a voice, and then you can have a way to communicate that with each other. Because we're emergency physicians, we think of the worst things possible. And if you don't have an outlet to talk about that, the rumor mills will come out, and then everybody will feel unheard, isolated, excluded, and that's the worst time to be in when you're in a disaster, right? So that's kind of how we first answered the question: how do you communicate the health impacts? let's figure this out first amongst ourselves. We can't fix the rest of the community if we can't even like figure out like what we need for ourselves. And then I think the strategies to then be comprehensive within the resource constraints, like we briefly talked about, like we have to have multilingual support because several of the communities may not like even like trust that we'll have the resources for them, or they may not trust that we will take care of them. So I think having those like different perspectives earlier on, instead of just in the moment making things up and then being wrong later on, and also knowing that we're probably going to be wrong, and that's okay. And this is why in those roles of sharing information, it cannot just be one person, because if I'm wrong, nobody's going to trust me. And so it's helpful also to kind of like shuffle those responsibilities, high stakes responsibilities, so that there's different points of contact, and also people can trust different groups. And again, having that centralized like communication, I think is key. How do we ensure transparency in our communication while respecting diverse viewpoints? I think that vulnerability that I will not have all the answer, right? As team leader, you have to just acknowledge that, because otherwise, we're also like, especially in academia, like the residents are always looking for times for me to like say something wrong, because then they can say like, Alvarez, see, that was wrong, right? We're always looking for like a way to survive. We're always looking for like the best path. But I think normalizing that like we are in a territory that we don't have the right answers just yet, but we need your support. Like tell me like what's happening in this neighborhood or that neighborhood. Like what do you need right now? And then being proactive then to like, all right, so what are the resources that we actually have? One of the examples that was shared is like when there's a big hurricane, for instance, like we would think that the hospital as an institution would say like, is everybody okay? But they're probably still dealing with so many different things. I'm seeing like, no, that's not true, because that's actually what's happening. The reality is people expect us as emergency physicians to figure this out because we're the front lines, right? But we also don't have all the answers. And so what we can do is, we know those people, we have them on speed dial, we can coordinate with them. So like, give me the quick download. What do I need to know to tell my people right now? I may not be able to tell them everything, like all the secret stuff they talk in the background, but at least I can give them some answers that will reassure them that we're trying our best. And I think that's very key. Questions? What else did I miss? Yes.
Okay, so if you reference the top of the Google Doc, we have some core principles that we highlighted there that we think are very important in crisis communication, which has been summarized by a lot of our speakers. So clarifying your intention, making your intention very clear, right, very early on, and centering the most effective. So bringing the people that are most effective to the forefront of the discussion, and assuming nothing. Listen and assume, make no assumptions about what is needed and what is happening. So just listen, and then create a safe space where they can share and they can feel vulnerable, but also pause before you act, right? So this is an infographic we created, and I think a lot of the things that are bulleted here have been well discussed by our facilitators. So being intentional and reflect. So we foster a culture. This process starts long before the crisis happens, yes. Right? You want to create that culture. And then when the crisis happens, there are things in place. So it has to happen way before the actual crisis. And just regularly elevate the impact and intention and make it transparent. And then centering the most affected. So this is something that we've talked about, right? Hearing their voices, hearing their experiences, and find out what is important to them at this moment and where do they need the support. And making space for them, even in the decision making, that you don't leave out the most affected as you are making plans, right? So sometimes, like Dr. Alvarez said, we're making, plans are taking place above, the like higher ups are making decisions, and then the most affected are feeling like they're left out or siloed and nobody has reached out. So putting them at the center and then creating a place where a safe space where they can be vulnerable and respectful dialogue, understanding that we're not always, and we mentioned this in our group too, like letting them know that this is, especially when it's an evolving situation that's gonna go on for a long time, that we don't have all the details, like, because this is controlled disclosure. We may not disclose everything. That's because we don't have all the details. So we disclose what we know, but understanding that we may get it wrong sometimes. So being vulnerable and let them know that, okay, you may get it wrong sometimes, but we are, doing your best, your intention, right? And then that is the promoting the culture of trust and vulnerability. But again, the trust starts long before the situation, right? And then leadership buy-in, we talked about, having our leaders involved and also finding out what is important to this institution. How can we tie our mission, our goals, or our approach to this crisis to also what is important to the institution? Because you need the leaders to buy in for sure, especially when you're working within an institution. And we share the responsibility, right? This is a collective commitment. This is all of us are involved in this, and we all feel committed to make this work. And then empathy, right? Non-judgmental and just emphasizing that we hear you, we feel you, and creating a space where they know that it's okay to come forth, and it's okay to express their feelings, leading with understanding and compassion, right? And then lastly, just that solidarity overall. This is, again, we are universally committed to whatever the goal is or addressing this crisis, and coming with like uniformed, whatever the goal, whatever the outcome is, just coming together and making sure that everyone is feeling heard. So for this next part, we want to ask you to a call to action. So go to www.futureme.org. So you know that having crisis communication and communicating in times of crisis as leaders, it's difficult, right? And we've all had to do it one way or another. So write a letter to yourself, and then just committing that, that the next time that, a crisis happens, like what are the things that you will do based on what you've learned from this session? What is something that you would do different in action, or something that you want to do more of that you think that you're doing currently, and then just commit to that so that next time a crisis happens or you are in a situation where you're called on to have those hard conversations, understanding that it may not feel comfortable, but it needs to be had. So write a letter to yourself and just.
You can take a picture of this. You don't have to write it right now because we're at time.
Write a letter to yourself,
But I
and this is
love
just a
this
call to
class.
action.
One way to frame this is to ask yourself, like, did I do my best?
Yeah.
Because you're gonna commit, like, I will do this. So ask yourself, like, cause you can say, I do this by the way every 6 months. Did I do my best? And you can also ask, like, have I had a chance to do this? Have I had a chance to actually do what I said I was gonna commit to?
Thank you. Any questions? I think we're over at time. Yeah, we're out. So,